Hey, welcome back, Warrior Next Door listeners, to the third installment of the John Little series. John Little was an infantryman, a rifleman who fought up the boot of Italy during World War II. He has already spoken to us in previous episodes about joining the war effort and what it was like growing up in the Great Depression and ultimately being brought into the Italian theater and what combat was like. In this episode, he's going to expand more on that. We have more questions about the living conditions, and we're going to start off with this clip where we talk about goats.
I have another question. Prior to the Battle of Monte Cassino, I understand that your division in January. So the first Battle of Monte Cassino was in late January of 44. And I think prior to that, your unit was pushing through an area called the Mignano Gap. And it appears that I was reading that you guys used some rather unorthodox methods for clearing minefields. Do you recall anything that was done on how you guys cleared the minefields?
Yeah, well, the engineers they were known as the combat engineers. They'd get in those minefields, and most of the time it was right about daylight of the morning. And they had a little old thing, they'd flip them mines up out of the ground. They'd reach over there with it and flip it up, hoping it didn't go up.
Uh-huh.
But that's where they cleared the minefield.
I was reading that your unit may have used goat herders or goat herds to go out across the fields and help clear the mines. Did you witness that?
We heard that too.
Yeah.
Goats and sheep.
Goats and sheep. Wow.
Yeah. We were the goats.
Yeah.
You were the goats.
What he's saying is, yeah, you may use goats and sheep, but at the end of the day, we end up tripping a lot of those. Mark Clark had a famous saying during a press report on the progress of the war when they were talking about trying to take Rome. And he said, all roads lead to Rome, and they're all mined.
Very true.
And mines were just a huge problem.
Yep.
And so with what I think what you read, and he was kind of saying, well, yeah, we did that, but at the end of the day, we stepped on a lot of them, is that we actually resorted to using farm animals to help detonate these mines?
Well, that's kind of what I was wondering. I was like, oh, wait a second. Did these goats, were they just able to sniff them out? Right. Or did they actually detonate them and then they got goat meat to eat?
I'm thinking the latter, but I mean, yeah, I don't know much about goats. Maybe they're smarter than I think. I don't know. But at any rate, the Mignano Gap is on the way up into the battle that they fought in Monte Cassino. In this next clip, he's going to talk more about some of the issues that they had once they got in the battle. Do you remember the first time that you went into action? Do you recall where it was or what happened?
Yeah, it was at night time. I remember that. They had a lot of night scrimmages, or call them ambushes, Sometimes you'd get was lucky enough that you didn't have to go out that night, and sometimes you wasn't. Because every unit had to take time, extra turn.
What do you remember about the living conditions? What was it like on the front line?
Well, I remember you was off the line as much as say a couple of weeks or so. You would, I remember you'd get a hot bath. They'd carry you back to the bivouac, they called it. You could move around. They'd have showers set up, maybe have 100 showers set up. You got a good hot bath with clean clothes.
And you're saying it was a few weeks on the front lines before you could do that?
Oh yeah. You'd have to be up there several days before you'd get back to the area that have the showers. And you could see them way before you got there because of steam coming from it.
Mm.
And that was a good feeling. Get a shower and clean clothes.
Yeah. What do you remember about the first casualty that your unit incurred? What were your thoughts when you got into combat and someone you knew got wounded or killed? What do you recall about that?
Well, it was just some things you put out of your mind. You had to keep going, and you just somebody got wounded. The medics was right there. I told you they had combat medics, and then they had the regular medics. But the combat medics now was on the front line.
Hmm.
And when somebody was wounded, they'd holler medics, and they went a running.
Hmm.
They showed up immediately. One no, well, he may not be hurt bad enough to have the medics. They were there, and the stretcher had certain people that carried them off the line on stretchers. Sometimes if they had so many, two men would carry them off. But all they did was stretch their bearers, carry them back, because the medics would take care of them. And if they had enough help, they would have one on each corner, or according to how big the person was, the man.
So a shout out to 109th Medical Battalion. Those were the men attached to the 34th Infantry Division, the ID, that would go out and take care of these guys. And he talked about a clean shower and clothes. That's something else that even military planners didn't account for. Military planners throughout World War II, maybe every war, thought, well, this is the amount of additional boots, clothes we're going to need as the front advances every mile through enemy territory. And they're almost always wrong. You got shrapnel flying around, you got blood, you got mud, you got rain, you got rocks ripping clothes. These guys, their clothes would just fall off them. So being able to go and take a hot shower behind enemy lines and get fresh clothes was important. The other thing that he doesn't mention much, he talks about the steam. The reason the steam was so prevalent is this is January-ish. This was the Italian winter. And pretty much every account I read or watch about the campaign in Italy talks about how miserable it was. Cold, piss and rain, snow-capped mountains, freezing nights, wet all the time, mud, different types of mud that did different things to you. So this was just a little snapshot of them coming off the lines to get revivified, so to speak.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and play the next clip before we get an Anzio, and I think it has a little bit of something that you shared with us, Ryan, and him at the same time that I think our audience is going to want to listen to.
I'm reading that obviously you guys took very heavy, severe casualties when you took Monte Cassino. Yeah. And it states here that the 135th, which is your unit, there was an average of only 30 men in each rifle company after the battle, and that so many men were lost. You guys were finally relieved around February 11th through the 13th of 44. And eventually it took the combined force of 5 infantry divisions to finish off what just your division nearly did on its own.
Yes.
And your unit was described as one of the most, one of the finest feats of arms carried out in warfare. So that's a pretty good ringing endorsement of how great you guys did.
I think C Company had about, called them walking wounded. I believe they said we had 7 or 8 men left in the company.
Oh my gosh.
I believe that's what I remember them telling after we got relieved.
And were you wounded at all? Did you have any injuries?
Yeah, but it wasn't there. It was on up north towards Florence.
Okay. We'll get to that, I'm sure. So yeah, I just want to jump in. as we've already stated, there were 4 battles from Monte Cassino. The first one started mid-January of 44. The battle for Monte Cassino would not end until mid-May of 1944. So we're talking 4 months of hard, vicious, bitter fighting with lots of casualties. John's unit was in the first battle of Monte Cassino. They actually crossed the Rapido River, like Tony said, and they came up a mountain range to the north of Monte Cassino, near an area called Death Valley and Snake's Head and all these different areas. Now, to me, looking at the map, it seems like that's a long way to go up, to come down south to to Monte Cassino. But that's what they chose to do at that time. And every battle after that was a different tactic to trying to figure out how to get up there and take the Abbey and everything. But in the end, 55,000 Allied casualties in that campaign, that 4-month campaign. 20,000 were German, 20,000 German casualties. Yeah. So we had almost 3 times the number of casualties that the Germans had. And it's considered a Pyrrhic victory. And, anybody out there who may not understand what a Pyrrhic victory is, it's when you've won the battle, but you have been hurt so bad yourself, you can't really fight anymore. Yep. Rome then fell right after this in June of 44. So it's interesting that all this heavy fighting really took place up until June of 44. Rome fell. And at that point, things moved forward. Go ahead, Tony.
No, and that's exactly what the next clip is going to be about. So everything you said, you nailed it. The fourth go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish. I got one more thing I want to add. That's just a little bit of an addendum. So
the fourth battle is actually called Operation Diadem. The fourth battle was the one that took place in May. It was General Alexander's brainchild. And really what he did was he understood, he said that Snake's Head hill behind the casino.
Yep.
They finally realized after 5 months of fighting that not Monte Cassino, not the hill around there, that hill behind it was the one that mattered the most. So they took the 8th Army, which was fighting along the eastern edge away from the fighting towards the Adriatic Sea, and they silently and secretly moved them over to Monte Cassino to get a massive force. And the idea with Operation Diadem is they're going to reinforce Anzio. That's where John's going with the 34th, and break out there at around the same time that the 8th, along with French troops, African troops, Polish troops, crash through this line by taking Snakehead. And then finally, they're going to be able to move up the Livorno Valley to Rome. So that's what's starting to take place right now.
What a difficult battle this has ended up being because of just the natural terrain. Not only did you've got ocean on both sides of the peninsula. Okay. You've got all these volcanic hills and all this craziness has happened over, millions and millions of years of geologic activity, the volcanoes and earthquakes and all sorts of craziness. So you've got all the mountains, you've got all the Roman history out there and all the battles that have happened there. One of the things I wanted to bring up as an addendum here, I mentioned this being a Pyrrhic victory. That's Pyrrhic is how that's spelled. And like I said, it's whenever you've won, but in the end, you really can't fight anymore because you're so hurt from the victory. Well, for those who may not understand where that comes from, in 280 BC, in this very region of Italy, to combat Roman expansion toward the Italian city of Tarentum, the rulers of that city hired King Pyrrhus of Greece to fight the Romans and hold the Romans off because they were going to take the town. The Romans did suffer a defeat there at the hands of King Pyrrhus at the Battle of Heraclea, I think that's how you pronounce it. But it was devastating to both sides. Pyrrhus remarked, "One more such victory and I'm lost."
Yeah. and that's, like you said, that's happening that happened thousands of years ago, right when this is happening now.
Yeah. And so he's 44. After that, Pyrrhus and his partisans were effectively massacred by the Roman army after that. Pyrrhus escaped. Yeah. Pyrrhus escaped, made his way up towards Rome, trying to reconstitute things, realized that if he got backed over in this corner along the Appian Way, he was going to get caught in these swamps this marshland. And in the invasion of Anzio, some of our allied commanders had to worry about the very same swamplands trapping them.
Yes.
Because they had them down to the south, and they had to make sure that they didn't get pushed into that muck and get, into a quagmire, so to speak. It's so interesting how thousands of years later that these same geologic issues rear their ugly heads, and inflict such damning casualties on both sides.
It's written that a lot of military historians think that Sicily is the most contested piece of ground on Earth because of its location in the Med and close to Rome and the Greeks and all that stuff. And you think about all these battles through thousands of years that have occurred. There was this really interesting heat map that I saw that took all the known battles throughout the world and put them as a dot, made it a heat map, and Europe just glowed red hot. I mean, it's no wonder after World War II with the Marshall Plan, when they rebuilt, that they focused more on their social programs and their military. They were just wiped out. They were tired. It was a Pyrrhic victory for them as well, morally and culturally. And now, because of what's going on in Ukraine, we're starting to see that change a little bit. But it is interesting and I remember another thing from the movie, The Big Red One, when they stopped at some place in France as they're moving up there. Heck, it may have even been Italy for all I know. And there was a monument, and this guy was reading the monument, and he's like, these are the names of our guys that died. How did they get the names on this monument so quickly? And, the grisly sergeant said, that's from World War I. And the guy's like, the guy said, but the names, they're all the same. And the guy's like, they always are.
Oh.
And it just shows that when you go in these battlefields and what happens, it's like, I don't know, man. If I were fighting in a situation like that and I saw that, I'm like, is this the Matrix? Am I caught in some sort of do loop? Do we right. ever get out of this?
Glitch.
Is this a glitch in the Matrix, right?
Well, in 2015, my family and I were lucky enough to be able to go to Italy. And one day we were on a day trip on a tourist bus going from Rome down to Mount Vesuvius. We're going to see Pompeii and Mount Vesuvius. On the way down, we stopped at Cassino for a rest stop. Stopped at this gas station.
I've been there. I know exactly the station you're talking about.
You know where I'm talking about.
I know exactly it.
I got off. I go inside. I try to find some Italian snack to get, So if I come out, I look up and
there it is.
There's Monte Cassino. It's right up there. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to go up there. I don't want to go to Vesuvius. I want to go up there, But anyway, it was it's very powerful stuff to be able to lay your eyes on things firsthand like that.
Yeah, it is. So at any rate, what we're going to talk about now is Operation Diadem, the breakout from the Gustave Line, the 31st Infantry Division's role in it, and more importantly, John's role in it. So he's being trained and retrained to go to Anzio to reinforce that beachhead so that they can attack through the Gustave Line, attack through the beachhead, meet in the middle, encircle the German army, and end the war in Italy, right? Well, it doesn't quite go down that way, but go ahead and play the next clip, and we'll learn more about his experiences at Anzio. How long were you in Monte Cassino or that area before you ended up going to Anzio?
Well, we was up there. We thought we was being relieved, and we heard we was going to Anzio, and it was about as bad as Cassino was. Anzio wasn't, but let's see, I believe, best I remember, one was about 30 or 40 miles from Rome.
Yeah, just were you part of the amphibious assault wave on the initial wave, or did you come in to reinforce the men who had landed there before?
We were relieved. We relieved the 3rd Division at Anzio.
Could you tell us about that? What did you see when you got there? What did you experience?
Well, I know the holes was real close together, and a boy told me that we were the whole we relieved, that we got in from 3rd Division, said if you have to go out, go to the right. The hole said them Germans is dug in right over that railroad track on the other side of that railroad. And said you're going to come up real close to them if you go to the left. Said if you can, go to the right. Well, we always tried to go to the right. There were so many things that you did to try to help the situation.
And so, as the relief force, what do you remember? What was your role there? Were you guys there to push the Germans back off the beachhead, or what was your mission?
Well, we went there from Naples on a ship that was loaded with 1st Armored Division tanks. And we had to ride those on top of those tanks. And as they unloaded, we rode them on the beach. I do remember that.
I bet you do. Yeah, I put that because who could forget
cool.
rolling into a beachhead, a storied one? They would have known about Anzio. They would have known what happened there. They would have heard about how horrific it was. To be able to roll into like a boss on a bunch of Sherman tanks. And he mentioned a thing about when he went to the foxhole of the 3rd ID soldier that he was taking over. That's a very personal thing. Here's from Donald Miller's book about what it looked like, what was going on at that moment. He writes, "It was a World War I style standoff with fighting reminiscent of that war. There were long lines of opposing trenches with a shell-shattered no man's land of tangled barbed wire and minefields between them. And the Germans had a World War I sized railgun called Anzio Annie, which fired 564-pound shells from its 154-foot long barrel. To move anywhere on the beachhead in daylight was potentially lethal. Set a GI trapped into chest-deep foxhole, and the nights were worse. The hole got about 6 inches of water, and you couldn't do anything but bail it out with your helmet. We wrapped the shelter halves in blankets around us, and they didn't do much good. They got soaked with the rain, so you sat on a piece of wood or something and shivered and cussed." That was his existence when they landed. Basically, March 25th, after rest and rehabilitation, is when they went and took over for the 3rd ID, and they had to maintain those defensive positions, so they broke out in May to go ultimately into Rome, which we'll talk about later. But man, I mean, what a terrible thing when you go on the beachhead, you're seeing all this stuff, you're on this tank, and then you go up into the foxhole you're going to take over, and a guy's like, "Look, you got to get out. You see that little thing over there by the bump in the hill and the clod of dirt? Do that. If you do anything else, you're dead."
Yeah, and try not to lose your foot to trench foot. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. While you're sitting in this crappy hole that's full of water all the time, because it's still, early spring there.
I'll never be able to fully appreciate, and I don't know that I want to, what those guys had to go through just to subsist. Just to keep going.
No. And the good thing is they had some friends with them. So in the next clip, he's going to talk about some of the people. Remember, I said this is a multinational force. It was multinational. Here's some of the men that he fought alongside of during his campaign. You roll up on a beachhead on Sherman tanks. It sounds like you occupied some positions that were really close to the German lines. Do you remember what happened next?
I do remember this, that there was an outfit that relieved us. They called themselves headhunters. You ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
And they smelled so terrible. They got in your whole wiggy because you was going to be relieved that night. And whether this be so or not, I don't know. I always was told, don't say anything if you don't have proof for it. That they got paid for how many years? They'd cut those German ears off. and hang them on their belt, and that's how they got paid.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And they smelled so terrible. I remember this guy that got in that mine in Ralph's Hole. That was my foxhole buddy. He was big and fat, and he looked like a headhunter.
Oh
Now,
my
they
God.
came out of those mountains in one of those countries that they don't have much morals about it.
Hmm.
You know, they just kind of, that's their way of life. That's how they live,
Yeah.
the way of the life.
So were these troops from like French North Africa, that area?
In North Africa.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, did you see them with like
Yes,
ears on their belts and all that stuff?
I saw them.
Oh my gosh.
So
Well,
And so
they,
that
they relieved
horrible.
us at night. We got relieved there at night in some casino, and because I sure was glad because it made so much noise. They
yeah.
paid no attention to how much noise they were making. They just that's just the way it was.
So them having this horrible stench about them was because of the
Yeah,
things they carried around with them.
yes.
Oh,
And there was half closed most of the time.
Well, I'm glad they're on our side.
That's true.
yeah, I was reading I had saw an entry, online about these French Moroccan soldiers and some of the accusations and claims against them. And I don't want to steal your thunder, but I was just gonna, you know, these are French Moroccans that were allies to us, and they were one of the units that fought alongside John's unit, like he's talking about here. They were it was the term for these atrocities that the Moroccans supposedly committed is called Moroccanate, or that's how I'm going to pronounce it in my Midwest vernacular. It's Italian for Moroccans' deeds.
Yeah.
And it's a term applied to mass rape and killings committed during World War II after the Battle of Monte Cassino. These were mainly Moroccan Goumiers, colonial troops of the French Expeditionary Corps. And my gosh, there's a whole Wikipedia page just on this Moroccanate topic. They committed mass rape. And the night after Monte Cassino was captured, May 18th, 1944, thousands of these soldiers, the Goumiers and other French colonial troops, scoured the villages of southern Latium, which is nearby. Italian victims associations such as, well, it talks about that 12,000 women ranging in age from 11 to 86 suffered from violence when village after village came under control of this group. Estimates made by the Italian Ministry of Defense in 1997 set the figure at 2,000 to 3,000 female victims. The number of men killed was around 800. Number of children born as a result of it is hard to estimate. But there are testimonials of mass rape in the town of Lazio, where, they were even raping old men.
Yeah.
It's vile. No other way to put it. Anyway, if you want to read more about this, it's very disturbing stuff. There's a Wikipedia entry called Moroccanate, Maroccinate, that you can read about if you want to learn more about this. It's a sidebar to this story, but nonetheless, we shouldn't forget that this stuff happens.
No, and I ended up doing some additional research on it as well because Ron and I, we have a connection, a tenuous one with Snafu Docs, which is a really fantastic YouTube channel. and we've got to know one of the contributors, Bob Koenigs, recently on a
Great
trip
guy.
that we did. So I was watching Snafu Docs. They interviewed another Italian vet. He fought for, I think, the 45th Infantry Division, and he was talking about these African troops as well. And so I started doing some research into it, and like it turns out that when French basically colonized most of West Africa and they raised these colonial troops, the catch-all term was tirailleurs, and that basically translates to, tribal troops. And so they came from many different tribes. It wasn't just a place, except for places like the Gumbiers, which you just mentioned, which were from Morocco. And there's mountains in Morocco, and these troops are fantastic mountain shock light infantry troops. So when I was first doing research on this, and I'd see these French divisions fighting alongside the 34th on their right flank, I thought they were French, like free French people from Vichy French. I didn't realize that they were colonial troops. Turns out they were really effective. Turns out the Germans were scared shitless of them. It turns out that some of the things that I've read is they didn't really have a lot of like noise discipline. They would just set up on the side of a mountain.
That's what he was saying.
Exactly. Yeah. They would just light up fires and stuff. When it came time to kill people, they would just roll in there and do it. This on Snafu Docs. Now, this is just what the guy was saying on the show. Actually, no, what I'm about to tell you now was not from Snafu Docs. It was from another YouTube documentary on the Canadian forces that fought there, and they fought alongside these French troops as well, the colonial troops. That the problem with them taking ears is that humans had two of them, so they could double up on what their count. So the rumor was, and it's just a rumor, that they started taking German private parts.
Man, cut their nose off. Don't cut that off.
I know. Jeez. And what this guy said, he was British. He said he was walking through one of these camps, and he heard that that's what these guys did. And he thought, what's the difference between a German private part and a British one? And he got the hell out of there. Now, there's more to this story. As history goes on and we study things more, there are elements of racism that are being applied to some of these troops. I don't know the answer. I'm just going to share with you some of the things that I've read where basically, so for example, you talked about the Moroccanate, which by the way, there's some Italians are still looking for reparations for right now to this day. They're still talking about it. So you're right. It's a thing. To me, there's no doubt that happened, but the question is to what degree and how are they allowed to happen? For example, there was a rumor during the war that the French general, in order to get these Moroccan troops to fight harder, said, if you bust through the Gustav line and we're rolling up in enemy territory, you take what you want. And that enabled them to do that. It turns out when they interview people after the war, there's no evidence that actually happened. There's also evidence that it wasn't as acute as what they thought in terms of numbers, and that we know that these sort of things happen in war by all troops, regardless of color. So some of the things that I've read and heard from people like John or the guy in Snafu Doc, some of it is kind of like, how much of it is because we came from a segregated society and we had black troops fighting alongside of us and they were scary, and how much it was real. Here's where I've landed. There seems to be enough written material and oral firsthand personal accounts of people saying that these dudes were scary to lead me to believe that they probably were. The Germans have written about these troops being very frightening. Like some of them would go up into battle without a rifle, just their knife, and just kill people with their knives. There is absolute evidence that there were large formations of Germans that when they were attacked or assaulted during Cassino by these African colonial troops, that they just ran. So, I mean, to me, it feels like the truth is somewhere in the middle. You probably did have a style of warfare in North Africa that was not what the Europeans were used to. It was probably applied there in a way that was very memorable and traumatic. And that at times, because war is what it is, it was taken out on the people the civilians there, and then they suffered horribly because of it. So I I ended up going on a rabbit hole. I studied this for 2 or 3 days. It was absolutely insane, and I could see where John would be a little bit like, "Holy shit, let's get this guy out of my foxhole."
Well, and one last little comment on that. If you think about, they're talking about they didn't have any noise discipline. They were just talking regularly, laughing, making fires, stuff like that. If I were on the other side and I saw these guys not caring how they were, whether they were hiding themselves, that would tell me that they don't respect what we can do to them at all.
Yeah.
Whereas the Allies at least try to be quiet, which means they respect what could be brought down on them.
Yep.
If these guys are not respecting it and they're just basically in your face, like, I don't care, I'm going to make as much noise as I want because I'm not afraid of you, that would probably get in my head a bit.
Yeah.
And to know what sort of things they're capable of doing on top of that would probably redouble that fear. And it's interesting.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing because it just popped in my mind.
I know
the YouTube video on Snafu Docs on the guy they interviewed in the United States from Italy. They wanted to bring him to Italy so he could take him to some of the places he went to. He got sick, he couldn't make it, so they were like Zoom calling him, and they were showing him what was going on. He was telling a story during his interview about one of these Moroccan soldiers, Gumbiers, where they had a knife, a very special knife with kind of a curved tip on the end. And this guy, I can't remember his name, but this guy's like, "Hey, can I see your knife?" And one of the soldiers, one of the GIs next to him, it's like, "Dude, no, don't do that." And the guy's like, "Why? What's the big deal? These guys are all scary. They're doing stuff. They're doing it with their knives. I want to see how they're giving the Germans a business. I want to see his knife." The GI leaves. And it turns out that this guy took out his knife, showed the American, and then before he put it back, he cut his thumb, wiped the blood on the blade, and put it in there. And what he learned afterwards, and the reason why that GI was like, "Dude, don't do this, this is stupid," is because apparently some of these tribes had this culture of, if you draw your knife, you will draw blood.
That's what the SS daggers were for too.
Really?
They had the same motto from the Germans, from the Nazis, was that if you draw your knife, it has to bring blood before you put it back in the sheath.
That's interesting.
That's what I read somewhere along the line, but anyway.
That is, so at any rate, there's just a lot around this. For our listeners, if you're listening to this, if you feel like we're off the mark, if you feel like there's other elements you want to add, we have a website, Warrior Next Door. We have a Facebook page. We have all this stuff. Yeah. Go there, leave your comments. We want to hear it. But we're going to move on to the next thing, because now we're going to transition from him holding the defensive line, Anzio, to actually breaking out. And the 34th did it masterfully. They held the center of the line at Cisterna, and they would break out. Some guys would win the Medal of Honor in the 34th for what they did there. And then the idea for Diadem was to encircle the Germans and get rid of them out of Italy, but it wouldn't quite work out that way. Ooh, I don't know how many people or our audience have heard about the French Moroccan troops or the colonial troops and their fighting alongside the Allied soldiers in Italy, but Brian and I did a lot of research on that. It was something that we had not heard of before, and it's probably one of the most difficult things for us as oral historians to share with people are the changes in perception of certain historical events that occur over time. And this is one of those. We hope you enjoyed some of the dialogue that we had regarding that, as well as John Little's firsthand personal accounts of what it was like to share a foxhole with some of these colonial troops. So this ends episode 3. Join us next week, because the breakout is going to occur. They're going to go to Rome. They're going to start working their way up the boot. But the fighting, it's just like the flag raising on Iwo Jima. That didn't end the Battle of Iwo Jima. There was a lot more fighting that would occur, and the same thing would happen in Italy after the liberation of Rome. So please join us next week.